As many of you know, I despise conspiracy theories, even if for no other reason than the fundamental absurdity that tends to underwrite them. But over the past week, I've arrived at a logical conclusion that is quite literally a conspiracy theory, albeit one that I haven't heard anyone else put forward yet. Last week I did this whole video explaining why it was so obvious that this military operation in Iran just wasn't going to work like it did in Venezuela, despite the fact that Trump seemed convinced that it would. And I explained why this raised real concerns about this lack of any informed voices in Trump's inner circle that were able to provide this critical advice that could have prevented the current escalation trap that we're in. But it has suddenly dawned on me that perhaps there's one aspect of this that I hadn't really considered. It's a possibility that, if true, it doesn't absolve Trump and Netanyahu of their folly, but might actually explain why this feels so chaotic.
In the last 2 weeks, they weren't supposed to go after all these other countries in the Middle East. Those missiles were set to go after them. So they hit Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. Nobody expected that. Look at the way they attacked unexpectedly all of those countries surrounding them. It was not supposed to be. Nobody was even thinking about it.
Maybe the reason that Trump and Netanyahu were so confident that the moment they killed the Ayatollah, there would be a new Iranian leader emerge that would quickly make a deal with them was because they had already made a deal with that person. What if the decapitation strike was actually pre-arranged with someone within the regime to clear a path for them? Maybe this person even helped make that strike possible. Now, remember, the strike that killed the Ayatollah also killed around 15 senior regime leaders. Now, they weren't hiding in a bunker. They were exposed very briefly in an above-ground compound, convening a high-level meeting with some of the most senior members of the regime. This was not a meeting that the Israelis just spotted from the skies. This was a rare moment where the Ayatollah and several high-value targets were coming out of hiding to meet in one place. Now, due to their well-placed mistrust of electronic communications, this kind of in-person high-level leadership meeting would have been necessary to discuss everything from the ongoing negotiations or preparations for a seemingly inevitable war. But the regime would have been smart enough to keep these meetings highly secret, especially if the logistics of hosting this many senior leaders meant it had to be above ground in a compound with no protection against airstrikes. And remember, this was the shot that started the war. Israeli intelligence had extreme confidence in who was going to be in the compound hours before they were there. So where did that intelligence come from? Now, it's worth noting that multiple credible reports indicate that the CIA had been coordinating with Delcy Rodriguez for months prior to the military operation that seized Maduro. That means that, essentially, what happened in Venezuela is little more than a US-backed coup. So with that in mind, and in this context, Trump's insistence that he believed this was going to go just like Venezuela might actually make a bit more sense.
He said there is a plan. He points to Venezuela as a template, which means to me that going in, they had some sense on the ground of what was coming next.
I said, how's that going to work? And he said, it's going to work very easily. It's going to work like it did in Venezuela.
Maybe Trump believed this would all work just like Venezuela because he believed he already had his Iranian Delcy Rodriguez. Now, if this is true, if Trump and Netanyahu had already handpicked their man in Tehran, the obvious question is, what happened to him? Did he get cold feet? Was he accidentally killed in an airstrike? Or was he even caught by the regime?
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group. They may be dead also, based on reports. So I guess you have a third wave coming in. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody. But we have, Venezuela was so incredible because we did the attack and we kept government totally intact. And we have Delcy, who's been very good. We have the whole chain of command.
Now, obviously, this is speculation. I'm being totally upfront about that. But the alternative is, as I explained in my first video, that this war was commenced with a terrifying ignorance of the likely outcome. It is actually slightly mitigating for Trump and Netanyahu if we believe that they had a plan that might have worked. But if that was the plan, it clearly hasn't gone to plan, and they don't seem to have a plan B, which might be why this feels like they've lost control of the situation. They only had one plan, and no contingencies. Now they're scrambling to come up with one.
Well, you know, I may have a plan or I may not, but how would I ever say that to a reporter? If I said that to a reporter, Marco would say, please, sir, let's bring you over to the helicopter immediately, right? No, I can't tell you that.